I honestly wouldn't be surprised if you get an anniversary transaction today.
Think so?
I wouldn't be surprised.
Something of some magnitude?
I don't know that it's magnitude, but I think that we might see something today.
Something bigger than Isaiah Campbell, like something bigger than that?
I would assume something bigger than Luis Urias and something like a bargain bin type of acquisition. But yeah, I don't know what. I just think that this is what Jerry does. He always kind of does something right about this time, and I'm anticipating it mostly because I have stuff I want to get done today. So that's usually when the Mariners do stuff like that.
Well, all right. Well, we'll hold off on the drinking long enough to give Jerry some time to make sure that you're where you need to be later. How seriously then, with kind of that as a backdrop, how seriously do you think the front office needs to take the comments made by the players at the end of the season?
Well, I think you want to take it seriously. I think there's always a divide between the players and the front office in any organization. There's a lack of trust. I mean, they're the bosses, and these guys are the employees. I think in any business, a lot of times there's not always a perfect trust of your bosses, whether it's depending on the micro level or the macro level. There's always some skepticism. And in baseball, it's always been that way because, the front office represents ownership and, some of the CBA stuff that came out the last few years and everything like that. And then you throw in Kevin Mather and all the things he said a few years ago that just sort of verified what everybody kind of thought anyways. And I think, that you don't want that gap or that distrust to grow more. I think that Justin Hollander especially has done a really good job of building back some of that trust with players. He's very interactive with the players. He talks a lot, like Adam Jude, I know, wrote about the interaction, thanking Teoscar and going and talking to different players on that last day of the season. I think Justin's done a great job of trying to build back some of that trust with the front office and being inactive and not doing enough to really help this team out, I think would really cause some of the core guys to question what the direction is. And for guys like Cal and Logan, who will be free agents eventually, it'll make them question whether they want to stay here or not. What are you doing to make this, a winning team? And do I want to be a part of this moving forward? I mean, I know the Mariners once offered Logan Gilbert an extension when he was a rookie. It was pretty small. They turned it down. George Kirby, these guys, you got to give them a reason to want to sign an extension beyond the money because they're going to get money from wherever they go. So it's like, what do you do to keep these guys happy? And also keep a fan base happy that's paid a lot of money over the last few years and showed up. When they've asked them to show up, they've shown up. And, what are you going to do? They've got to show up now.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in that. And I'm kind of back and forth. I don't think as hard about the need to keep fans happy, but I do think the players, look, you gotta show them that you are as committed as they are. The players don't necessarily need to get a final word on who you acquire. But when they say you've got to do more, I think you have to listen to them. The question is, how big do you need to go? I mean, you were 2 wins behind the playoff teams last year. Is this a matter of tinkering? Is this a matter of adding some better players on the, not necessarily the fringes, but sort of that middle tier? Or is this about going out and looking for the highest of impact bats?
Yeah, and that's a line you have to walk. You're right. The players, you want them to play. You've asked them to commit to a culture of preparation and work and improvement. What does Scott say? Doesn't matter, get better. Mm-hmm. Well, that should apply to the front office too. Doesn't matter, get better. Whether it's, you have to get uncomfortable financially to do it, or you have to get uncomfortable with the years you offer. It doesn't matter. You got to get better. You've asked these players to buy into that mindset. You've got to follow the same. Can't be hypocritical. I think obviously players recognize names, that's kind of why when players vote on stuff, they're not looking at WAR totals and stuff like that, or the real data. They recognize names. But I think, players also, it's the whole game recognizes game. Even if it's a guy that maybe isn't the top of the line free agent, but these players know that he's a good player and he's performed against them. Yeah, then I think, they understand that. They, even something as simple like last year when they were trading Seawald, I think everybody knew that he was being traded. I think they were all kind of resolute to that. And then it was all about what were they getting in return, And I remember telling J.P. Crawford, there's a lot of weird rumors going around. And I said something about one player from the Diamondbacks, and J.P.'s like, oh, he sucks. That better not be who we're getting back for him, So it's like stuff like that. It's the players, players always aren't going to recognize value, but like players recognize who's good and who can help them win. If it's a guy that's maybe not the star player, but they realize, hey man, this guy, we've watched him play. He's a grinder. He does what we do. He believes in the same things we believe in. That's important because again, like Jesse Winker was sort of a name. He was an unknown name, but he was an all-star and he had good numbers.
Yep.
He didn't fit their culture.
I really hope that the player you were talking about with Crawford wasn't either Canzone or Rojas, just for everybody's sake. I'm not going to ask you to answer.
He was a former he was not one of those guys that they got. I can tell you that.
Well, that's definitely for the best. There's nothing worse than saying that and having that guy show up and locker next to you a couple of days later. That's not what anyone's looking for. Ryan Divish, Seattle Times, joining us here on Seattle Sports. Shannon's made, I think, a pretty compelling argument, Ryan, that the thing to focus on this offseason is more pitching. That as frustrating as everybody's been with the bats, that actually it was the arms that let them down in September, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. What do you make of the idea of going after more pitching primarily this offseason?
Well, you can do it, and it gives you flexibility to maybe move one of those guys. They do have. I mean, like Robbie Ray's not going to be ready till August, and Marco will be ready supposedly. But you do have some depth there. But again, like if that's your strength, and you can't access, especially through free agency, the hitters to supplement your team, then make a strength stronger, and then you can deal from that area of strength to maybe go out and get a bat, that's under control and doesn't have any control about whether he's going there or not. So, I've always, I think on our podcast, I've always said that I think they're going to sign Blake Snell because he really wants to come home, and then they'll trade one of the pitchers, and then they could, for a bat, and then you look and you've added another power arm. If you're Blake Snell, you look at the Mariners and what they do. I mean, I think they can clean up some of his inefficiencies in the strike zone. Make him a guy that goes a little bit more than 5 or 6 every time, gets through the lineup 3 times without being at 100 pitches. I mean, like somebody like that you could do very easily. And then all of a sudden you're rolling out a rotation. You've got Castillo, Kirby, Gilbert, Blake Snell, and then one of the young kids that you kept, or even if you kept Marco, I think that's important. I think the other thing is that George Kirby and Logan Gilbert have not missed a start in 2 years. I mean, you have to be wary of that. I'm not saying they're going to get hurt, but you have to be wary of that. It just doesn't happen very often where guys take the ball I guess George missed one because he was sick, but not because of an arm issue. But these guys have been unbelievable. They work very hard at it. But again, pitchers get dinged up over the course of time. Robbie Ray and Marco Gonzalez are 2 of the most durable starters in baseball, and they came up with injuries. So having depth at that position is important, especially if you know that you can't really upgrade your offense that much. You better be really good pitching-wise if you know that you cannot make major upgrades to your offense.